that was a great conversation. It's always wonderful to see the innovation that comes from entrepreneurs. And as Jesse mentioned, that was an elite group chosen from over 100 applicants. So congratulations to the winner again. I'd like to, at this point, bring in my guest who I am really excited to interview. She's an esteemed academic. She is a foreign policy analyst, was a top advisor in the State Department. But she's best known for starting a different kind of conversation that she started just a couple of years ago, just over a year ago, actually. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Anne-Marie Slaughter. Hello.
Hi.
It's great to see you.
It's great to be back.
So now you were here last year when?
I've been here
many times.
Since 2005 when I was here talking about foreign policy, and I hope at some point I'll be up here talking about foreign policy again. And most recently I was here when Hillary was here 2 years ago, I think, when she came and spoke. So
we might have time for one foreign policy question, but I don't think so. So, so as I mentioned, Anne-Marie really kind of entered into a new phase of focus for her a few years ago. Actually, no, last summer. It was June 2012.
June 2012.
When an article came out in The Atlantic that Anne-Marie wrote, and it was called "Why Women Still Can't Have It All." I'm sure people in the room are familiar with it. It got a lot of attention. It had 1 million page views within 4 days or close to it. It's now been viewed 2 million times. It struck a chord. So why don't you first tell us about the article?
Well, the first thing to say is that there's no possible way I could have imagined the reaction that it had. After 2 days, I was in Europe, I came back, I was on the front page of the New York Times. My mother called me and said, "What have you done?" And that's a question I've asked myself a lot.
What did you do? Tell us, what was the basic premise of it?
Well, I explained it in the article, particularly in this group. I think I don't have to explain to this group why writing that piece was breaking a taboo. Why, particularly for those of you who are my generation and older, saying anything other than what we've heard here for the past 2 days, which is, of course you can do it if you want it badly enough, if you try hard enough. Marilyn Houston said yesterday, her mother said, you can do anything you want to do. And that's what I spent many, many years telling all the younger women I've mentored. And they would say, how do you do it? And I'd say, you just do it, And I would say, well, I'm a tenured professor and that does make it easier. But I basically said what we all say, which because we want women to advance, you can do it. You just can do it. And, I finally hit the tipping point that none of the women in this room probably have hit because you're here. It's the women who you started business school with who are not sitting next to you anymore, and the women you entered the workforce with who are not sitting next to you anymore, who hit those tipping points. And when I hit a tipping point, I realized that I had essentially been looking at many of those women and saying, you're just not as committed to your career as I am. I'm still there, why aren't you? And when it came down to choosing between a job I would kill for, don't get me wrong, I would kill for that job, and I sure hope eventually I'll have a chance to get it. But between that and a kid who was really heading south, I made a different choice. And then not only did I make a different choice out of need, I made a different choice out of want. And it never dawned on me that I would do that. I never thought I would turn down a job I was dying for because I wanted to be with my kids. And once that happened, I really looked at the world through a different lens. And I knew that it was going to be controversial. What I didn't know is that, wherever I go now, and I've given over 100 speeches, 120 speeches in the last year, thousands of women come up to me and say thank you for basically being honest, for pushing beyond the you can have it all narrative if you just try hard enough and if you're just ambitious enough. And I hope we can get to a place where we can talk both about the importance of leaning in and the importance of understanding that it actually can be really hard. You might have a child who has special needs, you might have a parent who dies, you might get divorced, you might have to move. That the narrative of let's just try actually means a lot of people feel like failures.
So you mentioned Lean In, and your article was controversial when it came out to begin with, but then when Lean In came out and had a different kind of message, the media had a field day with basically, saying you were the opposite of what Sheryl Sandberg was saying and positioning this as really a one versus the other. You think a lot of that was misconstrued. You do agree on some things, and you do disagree on some things. So why don't you explain a little bit? I mean, for example, you and I talked about this. You agree that there are a lack of women leaders in general, and the world would be a better place if there were more of them. I mean,
Yes,
I think
yes,
anyone
no,
would
that's
agree
where
with
we
that.
start out.
But the thing, I want you to talk about the things you disagree on. I mean, basically that there is maybe an ambition gap.
Yeah.
Or that there isn't.
So,
You think there isn't.
I think there is much less of one than what Sheryl sees, which maybe we are inhabiting different worlds. But let me start by saying, I give speeches all over the country all the time, and I tell every single audience to read Lean In, right? And at 43, I could have written Lean In. At 43, I'd never met a challenge that just working harder or spending more money would not overcome. I'd never encountered anything that I couldn't just power through or buy somebody else to take care of. But by 53, I had. And that was a very different experience. And so I think Lean In is hugely important. My husband taught me a lot of the things that Sheryl writes about, to be present at the table, to insist. I mean, all the things that if you're here, you've learned how to do that. I totally believe in that. But what I worry about, and I think it was wrong of me to say that the Barnard audience that Sheryl first talked to thought she was being reproachful, but I can tell you what breaks my heart is all those women who you started out with who are no longer in the workforce, or at least not on the leadership track. They feel like failures. They feel like they let the side down because somehow they couldn't do it. When in fact, these are women, as I said, who might have a child with special needs or a family situation that came apart, or they had to move, or their husband got promoted. Life happened to them, and they weren't superhuman, and they didn't have enough money, or they got shut out when they tried to have a more flexible workplace. And what I'm worried about, and where Sheryl and I differ, is I don't deny that maybe there's some ambition gap among some young women who think they can't do it, and I want to encourage them. But I see much less of an ambition gap and much more of a workplace and a society that is still not actually allowing us to use the talent that is multiplied well beyond this room. And I want us not to have Sheryl and I are not on opposite sides. I want us to have a debate where we can be both honest and encouraging at the same time.
But you see women. So you have very specific policy changes and things that you think we need to change about our society to do this. I mean, you do see a solution here, but it's not sitting at the table only, and it's not raising your hand more only, and it's not asking more of men only, but it's part of that. But what else is it? What are the policy things and the ways that we systemically need to change our culture and our institution of work to make this possible?
Right. So I think we have to start by, everybody says this, but I think I have a way to do this, to move this beyond a woman's issue. So look at my article, and I did not choose the cover, ladies. I really didn't. I did not choose that cover. Old women of my generation, if you saw it, the pumps, the woman with the pumps and the baby in the briefcase. My assistant and I both went, oh no. Interestingly, many younger women don't have that reaction, but still, I was talking about why women still can't have it all. I didn't choose the title either, but we could talk about that later. Sheryl's book, Lean In. Deborah Spar's book, Wonder Women. This is still all talking about what women should or shouldn't do. And we simply have to get beyond that, because as long as this is a women's issue, no matter how great we are and how much mentoring we do, it's not going to attack what I see as the underlying problem. And what I see as the underlying problem is that they're sort of, as Bill Gates said this at Davos, there are two fundamental forces in human nature. One is competition. We know all about that. Competition, puts us on our best game, and we win and we succeed. But the other is care for others. Two equal forces of human nature, competition and care. In our society, we value competition 1,000-fold. We talk about breadwinners, right? Winning is great. We devalue care. Our generation of feminists, my generation of feminists, was raised to devalue what our mothers did. We didn't want to do what our mothers did. That wasn't important. What was important was what our fathers did. And that made sense for the first generation of feminists because we wanted access to power. But look at it this way. If you take time to care for somebody you love, and if we don't care for those we love, our whole society comes apart. You will pay a price at the top. You will be disadvantaged in your career if you've taken time out or you've worked part-time or you've worked differently. So you pay a price at the top. But at the bottom, right, there are too few women at the top and there are too many women at the bottom. Because if you have to be the breadwinner and caregiver together, you're a single mom, you get no support. We do not value care. We do not give you the support that you need to be able to care for those you love, woman or man, but it's mostly a woman.
But this is a lot about what Cheryl talks about too, but she puts it in, find the right partner.
Yeah, but
you say that's not the answer, and we'll take a question in a minute, but let's...
So find the right partner is great, and I have a wonderful partner, actually, let me just ask, how many of you have a stay-at-home husband or a husband who's a primary caregiver? Yeah, that story never gets told. And part of the culture of care is that those men are devalued. They are not seen as masculine as other men. They are not celebrated. We are not saying, you know what, the man who's giving care while the woman is the CEO is every bit as important. I'm saying that it's not just an individual thing, that it can't just be about finding your right partner. It has to be a much bigger change where we value care and we value competition.
But you're talking about changing the values of our society and
Yes,
culture. That's not easy to do.
No.
So is that actually doable?
I think it is. So let's just give some examples. When I grew up, my mother, when she gave dinner parties, I grew up in Virginia in the 60s, she put little vases of cigarettes out on the table when she gave dinner parties. If you did that in New York today, you'd be arrested. Right? That's a huge value change. And you actually watched it go from being the Marlboro man, you know, this sign of masculinity, to my brother is an investment banker, and when he was smoking at the end, it was regarded as you were weak. Or look at gay marriage or single-sex marriage. We've had a sea change about how we think about that. Why can't we have a sea change about the value of caring for each other and the value of competition? This isn't one or the other. Why can't we say that a woman or a man who takes time out to care for children or parents or a spouse or loved ones is somebody we should value? I personally don't want to hire people who put their work ahead of their family in a crisis. I mean, obviously, I commute 2 days a week. I'm not saying that you have to be there all the time, but I think the values of this society have gotten skewed in the direction of all work, all the time, all competition, all winning. And we need to push it back, not all the way over here, just back toward the middle so that we have a way of valuing care as well.
Who has a question for Anne Marie? Yeah, Jerry. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jerry Elliott from Juniper Networks.
Hi.
I feel compelled to say this as somebody who leaned out at the prime of her career and leaned back in when I needed to, and I leaned out because of a family issue. I just wanted to say thank you, because what you say is so important.
Thank you.
And I've always been appalled, actually, that people have pit you against Cheryl, because I think both of you are absolutely right. And the real issue is we all should be supporting each other as women to make the choices that are important to us at the time of our lives. So thank you for that. The only difference I see between the two of you is actually Cheryl has youngins and you have teenagers.
Yeah,
and honey,
me.
They are completely different.
know.
So
I
you might
know.
want to comment on that.
No, I do believe that when in the review I wrote in the New York Times of her book, I said, you know, she's still at the age where her kids want to be with her. That makes you feel guilty when you leave them, but it's, you know, I'm at the stage where they don't want to be with me, and that's the problem. Less so now. And just for the record, my son approved every word I wrote, right? I would never have written anything that he didn't approve, and I know lots of people did. But you raised an important issue. I hope people will be really honest here. how many people really didn't like what I wrote, and how many people felt that I was letting down the side, that I was discouraging younger women and setting feminism back? Please be honest.
Anne Marie was a little nervous to address this crowd, I will say. So
there are many of you who I know. I mean, I know that people, and many of you, when I meet you now, your jaws tighten a little bit. And you look at me like, you know, you made a big splash for yourself, but actually you set back what we've been working for. And to you, I say, I'm working for that every bit as much as I ever have. And I'm a feminist to the core. But I went through a life experience that made me realize that there are millions of women out there who need a bigger tent, who need us to start saying more than, honey, you can do it if you just try hard enough. And for those of you who have done it, it's fabulous, and I want the role models, but it's just not enough. And I hope we can come to a place where we can talk about that without this divide. I truly do.
I'm so sorry that we're out of time because I have about 15 more questions for you. But I will say, so 2 million page views. Anne Marie has a book coming out next spring about this. Cheryl has sold 1 million copies. I mean, I think there is room. Both of these ideas are obviously striking a chord. I think they're less different than we think. So thank you for being here
Thank
today.
you all. Thank you.
Oh.